Right. So we've had the call to revolution or rebellion or whatever, and we've had the practitioners trying to do it on the everyday level. I have to say I had a local authority come to me and say, we've got to deliver a garden village. How do we do it before the developers come in and just say, oh, we'll do it, which is the issue. So, and I've worked in the construction industry a long time. The construction industry don't change. They're not very innovative. Challenge me. And it takes a long time for them to actually take risks. And local authorities don't have any money and not much capacity. When I did the Foresight programme on the future of cities in the UK 2 years ago, okay, the big cities, I've just been with the mayor of Birmingham, Bristol, and I work in Manchester. We have some big cities who know what they're doing, but there's lots of small places who haven't got a clue. And if they get a big developer coming in who just has the answer, I'm afraid we won't achieve this sustainable ambition. But that's me just being a bit of an academic. So have we got any questions for our panel? Right, we've got one at the back and then one there.
Hi, Dan Jestico from Iceni. Question for Amy. You touched on a subject which is quite close to my heart at the moment, feeling quite strongly that we're not doing enough review of the work we actually do in terms of planning and design, and asking the people who occupy our spaces that we designed recently what they like and what they don't like. We think we know best as urban designers, we think we know all the rules, but then you go and ask people and they say, well, this is wrong. Why do you do this? So what's your feedback been from actually going and asking people, especially in newer developments, about what's worked and what hasn't worked, and kind of how would you encourage the industry to do more of that kind of retrospective questioning to make sure that we're building the right stuff in future?
Okay, thank you. Well, do a couple of different things. We do a bit of sort of formal going and reviewing ourselves. So we, as I say, we use Building for Life. We go out on site, we go and take photographs, we publish it every year in our annual monitoring report how we're doing on housing quality, and I use those photographs to show them to developers and say, you know this, do you really want to do that again? Do you think it's good? And they, by and large, will say, oh no, it's not great. And I said, well, let's not do that again then. So use it for advocacy. We also go and do something really, it sounds really tedious, but it's been really useful, go and do a parking survey, see where people were planned to be parking, but where they're actually parking. And that's really useful because that just shows that we're building often too much parking, or certainly enough parking, but it's in all the wrong places, so no one's using it, and they're parking in totally different places, mainly on the pavements. So again, having data really helps you to make better policy and practice. But I think post-occupancy discussions with residents is really important. I know that it's something that architects often want to try and do but struggle to get the funding to do. There's also money within transport plans to go back and assess, but I don't think anyone ever goes and checks whether that's being spent. So that's something I do, is go back and start nagging and saying, well, hang on, we got this money for a travel plan. Has anyone ever gone back and checked, and why the hell aren't they? Because why are we keeping doing this stuff again and again and again? So yeah, it needs to be built into the monitoring, and so that the developer pays for that monitoring work to be done long term, and that you check out that it is being done.
So my point, I agree with all that, and I agree we must reform the house builders. But the problem we got at the moment is that we have a system where building good stuff is actually the exception, and we can do good practice and we can get them to do better, but actually we need to change the system. The master developer system is a system which actually generates good practice as standard, as opposed to the exception. And so changing the way we do this stuff, which is actually, it sounds like we changed the world, but actually master developers are happening. Local authorities can act as master developers themselves, and just find a way of separating the land development side from the actual house building is a way of achieving that.
Okay, there was a question here and then a question back there. So.
Hi, thank you. Alan Simpson from Anglian Water. And I actually live right next door to the new garden community. And I really enjoyed your slide about the underworld, which is relevant to what I'll be talking about later. I guess my question is building upon that learning and taking those lessons that we're seeing in each development, applying those across local authorities generally. At Anglian, we cover some 64 local authorities, and there's a bunch amongst those. So how do you share that experience and those lessons so we don't have to keep repeating those? And I guess keeping an eye on the war rather than the battles.
Paul, how do you share? How do you share the lessons? You're an academic, you've seen all this stuff. How do we share it?
That was a question to you, but I'll let you come back in a second, yeah?
I know.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think what's going to break some of this deadlock, which we're all frustrated by in our own professional practices, is the power of good examples, yeah? So, micro examples. People want to look under the bonnet, don't they, and hit it and see if it works. And what people really want to do is look at how good design changes daily social practices. We want to see people living differently. We want to see it in photographs, but we want to see that family having that day out on that bike rather than driving to Costa and pets at home, right? They want to see it. They want to follow the example. And the key thing is, and it keeps it's so intriguing, the different bits of the jigsaw that people are laying down, and I want to get a complete sense of all the different bits of the jigsaw we haven't got still. And it's always comes back to some of the stuff Yangel always says about the place between buildings, because we can have beautiful islands and pockets, but I think what David's getting at is just who's going to knit it all together. Because I live in a beautiful place at Lilac Grove in Leeds, right? And it's a beautiful car-like development, and my kids are safe, and it's brilliant for me and my family. But go outside that, and it's straight back into everything that's rubbish, like dangerous, polluted streets, straight away. So knitting it all together, we need the really beautiful, progressive orchestrator of the future sustainable urban world.
Do you want to answer, Amy, from a local authority perspective? How do you share it with other local authorities?
Yeah, so it's good working for 4 local authorities together, and that's one way of just automatically kind of forcing people to talk to each other, which is good. We do something, little basic things. We do a site visit club, and we go and look at places. We take councillors as well as officers to site visit club, and people love it. People love going to look at things. So that's really good. We've been down to Poundbury. This was a longer site visit. We've been down to Poundbury, but we've been to Craven Hill, the big self-build in Vista. So we do that. So we get people out of their offices, but we do things like this as well. We come and talk at these things. And I think local authorities sort of feel guilty sometimes if you go and do something like this, but I don't think we should. I think we should say, look, we are trying, guys, but this is really hard. And to make sure that they talk to each other. Just on the master developer point, I think that's really important too. So for the Garden Village, that was really critical that we have that kind of longer term vision, that we don't, and that the local authority is buying into that vision as well, and using government funding to help us leverage. The point about that is that it won't get permission unless it's exemplary. But it's exemplary, so it sets an example for everywhere else. It's not so way out there that nowhere else can do it.
I just want to... Hi, Alan. We've been working with Alan on Wisbech Garden Town in Fenland, and Anglian Water have been very much involved in that. And it's a fantastic opportunity to put this stuff into practice, because there are no house builders currently interested in Wisbech. And so actually we have a chance to think about the way through. And you look at Wisbech, and Wisbech is absolutely beautiful. It's a beautiful Georgian town. And like most of these beautiful places, they were created before the planning system was invented. And we created a system which actually makes these places worse. We did better before it existed, and that's quite an indictment, I think.
And then there was another question at the back there, and then one here.
Hi, my name's Thea Gordon-Rawlings. I'm studying landscape architecture, and I'm curious as to how you've built in emergency vehicle access and service access roads into your pedestrian-friendly places that you've been designing. I think this is probably for the...
Can you speak up a little more? We can't hear it, what you're saying.
Did you miss all of it? Do you want anything repeated?
Just the whole
thing. Okay. I'm curious as to how you've built in emergency service access into the places that you've been designing, because I can see how wonderful it is to get rid of roads so that places are more pedestrian friendly. But yeah, I'm wondering.
So, the way that I said that connectivity was absolutely critical, and my point, I'm absolutely, the critical thing is to get connections in. Now, the use of those connections over time, because once we put a street in, that's going to be there for thousands of years. Once we put a street in, we can manage the traffic down that street in time, but the key thing is to get the connection. So that's the first point, is get the connections in, and then you can stop access, you can filter permeability so that you allow it just to be for walking and cycling. I think one of the things we did before was built a lot of cul-de-sacs and connected them up with little tiny narrow footways, but no one wants to use those. They're not safe, they're not overlooked, and they're not that convenient. So get the connection in first and then worry about how you're going to manage vehicle movement. You may not want any vehicle movement, or it depends on the site. I mean, if you've got a site that's got you've only got one point of access, then you're going to need to manage it. But as far as I'm concerned, if you see a scheme on a site that says it's got an emergency access point to get over the fact you've only got one access and 200 vehicles on it, you're on a sticky wicket already. They need to be knitting their development into the surrounding place.
Thank you. We've got a question here.
Hi, Muhammad Ashur, architect, Places of Architecture. In sustainable development, transport is a big issue, as David mentioned. My question is, do you think that idea, just like car sharing, it would be possible, and for the journey from home to work? And if yes, what is the challenge? Thank you.
The answer is I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. We did a symposium at the Academy of Urbanism last year in Milton Keynes, which is 50 years old. And if you look back at the world when Milton Keynes was built, and everyone would have 2 or 3 cars, and the whole thing would be designed with public transport wasn't important. The world has changed so much since then that who knows what it's going to be in 50 years' time. My personal view is that driverless cars will never actually happen. I think the legal issues with them are too great, and they will never actually happen. All those things, car sharing, all that stuff, we need all of it. We need public transport more than any of that as well. Personal transportation, I think, as Paul said, isn't the solution. We need to get around with mass transportation. But yeah, I can't see the future, and I think we should design with that in mind and not assume we know what it's going to be and design just for that, because we'll be wrong if we do that.
Paul, do you want to?
I think one of the interesting developments is going to be people. If you're under 25, you're less interested in owning a ton of metal, and this is right throughout the world. We can see this, and I think we're going to be moving towards mobility as a service, right? So not a thing, not an object you, a consumer durable you own, but like something you dial up on a single payment platform. I think in 50 years' time, that's how we'll get around. You'll just dial up a bike, a taxi, a car hire, a boat, whatever you need to get around from A to B. It's just a bit dull. You've got to go from A to B. We've just locked in our mobility to this weird fossil fuel-based metal thing. And there's a long story about how we got there, but we'll just need to unravel it and then get to this other mobility system just over the Golden Valley.
Okay. Any more questions? There was one over there.
Dan Monk from Green Roof Shelters. Could you give us any more examples of master developers? Particularly, you mentioned that the idea of local authorities as master developers, but are there other examples that you can give?
Yeah, this is my last week at the Joint Planning Unit. I finish on Friday, and on Monday I'm going to work for Homes England, and their ambition is to be the #1 master developer. So that's one for you. So I'll tell you how it gets on. But we also have Urban and Civic working in Northamptonshire, who are a master developer, and they're doing a lot of that kind of thing where they're basically get the sites ready, but put the green infrastructure and the major networks in first, and then use that to drive up the quality that they require through very careful coding of the house builders. they work with the whole range, because the amount of housing that we're talking about building, you can't just use the big house builders, you're going to have to use everybody.
So master developers were the way pretty much everything was built until the Second World War. Most of London was built that way, most of our cities are built that way. It's the way that most large developments are done elsewhere in Europe. And so we were in Finland last year. Helsinki Docks has been done by the council as a master developer. And when you ask the city planning officer of Helsinki about it, and he didn't understand our questions, because he's saying, this is just how you do it, surely. You mean you do it? He didn't understand that we didn't do it that way. And yeah, I think in terms of the future going forward, I think local authorities are very good potential master developers. I cut my teeth doing the Hume redevelopment in Manchester back in the 90s, which was master developed by the City Council. I think there are also private companies that will do it, Urban Civic being one of them. The scheme I showed you has been done by U&I, who are another master developer company. Grosvenor, who of course built Mayfair back in 1700s, is also still going and is also a master developer. So there are private companies around. And yeah, Homes England, by all means, it'd be great to have that in the market of someone who could take that on.
Okay, any other questions? Well, we're nearly at the end, and I thought it would be good to sort of sum up from each of our panelists just one thing we should do immediately. One thing we should do immediately. Paul?
I think some kind of climate emergency planning fund which will supercharge all this and give municipalities the power they need to take on the challenges that Amy and David have so eloquently raised.
Amy, one thing.
Become a parish or town councillor and fight for these things now. Fight for pedestrians, get in zebra crossings, fight on air quality.
I think we need to up the urgency of this massively. I think we're still talking about we need to change radically, and then we'll write a policy about it and it'll get implemented in 5 years' time. Too late. We need to sort of completely change the way that we talk about this stuff, so that we are now emergency planning as opposed to planning for some long-term future and working towards it gradually at a pace which is far too slow.
So I think it's civic activism and changing rapidly rather than sitting ruminating on it all. So thank you very much to the panellists, and thank you to the audience for the questions. Thank you.